Yeah, you people, as you people out there in YouTube land, how do you do? So, what's our venture today? So, as per last week, we are waiting for the rain to stop so that I can continue exploring this place, which is the Japanese Cemetery Park. Yes, Japanese Cemetery Park. So the rain has stopped, but that doesn't stop our adventure here at this park. And an interesting feature I noticed, I find, or at least for me, I found very interesting is this tree here. Do you know what this tree is? This tree you see in the middle here is actually an old lychee tree. Yes, lychee, the fruit. But unfortunately, due to Singapore's climate, it is unable to bear fruit. But still, can you believe it? There is a lychee tree at this park. And this lychee tree is at this tomb of this next notable person that we are going to talk about. The individual buried here is an individual called Futaki Takijiro. He was one of 3 people who founded this cemetery in 1891. So what happens was, Mr. Futaki Takajiro owned rubber plantations, and he combined or donated 6 acres of his own land with another 2 acres of adjoining public land for this graveyard. And what they did was, they applied for permission to the British colonial government to officially grant them permission to use this land as a cemetery for Japanese residents who were not able to get back to Japan. This cemetery actually has a very sad history or very sad past, because the reason the people actually created this cemetery, the 3 men, were actually brothel keepers or brothel owners, and the people who were buried here at this cemetery first and still rest here, majority of the people who rest here were actually destitute Japanese prostitutes who died in Singapore. So when this cemetery was created in the 1890s, the core segment of the Japanese population working in Singapore were mainly prostitutes and pimps. And these women were called Karayuki-san, or what it means in Japanese is women who have gone overseas. Many of them came from rural areas of Shimabara Peninsula in the Nagasaki Prefecture and the Amakusa Islands in Kumamoto Prefecture. A lot of these women had a hard and sad life in Singapore, and many of them couldn't afford to go back to Japan. And if you look at some of these tombstones, especially the small ones, you can see a lot of them are very small, and also the wordings on the tombstone has gone through a lot of weather, rain, erosion, and a lot of the tombstones you can barely make out any of the inscriptions on it. So in their life they lived a hard life, and in their death also a hard death. And the tombstones of the Karayuki-sans account for more than almost half of the gravestones in this cemetery. And many of these gravestones were later installed to replace old wooden markers that had decayed. Let me just say a reminder of what I mentioned last week. If you look at the tombs here, the size of the tomb actually denotes the stature of the person in his life. So like this small little tomb here is probably for someone who was poor and not well known, whereas the bigger, more elaborate tombs are for those people who were rich and probably had a high uh, station in life in the society in Singapore at that time. Another notable, maybe we can call this a memorial, not a tomb, is this one here. This is the memorial of the Field Marshal Count Hisaichi Tarauchi. He was the supreme commander of the Japanese forces in Southeast Asia. Tarauchi led the conquest of Southeast Asia and was under detention in Johor, but he died in 1946. He was later cremated in the cemetery and his ashes flown back to Japan. But this memorial actually stands here, erected to him by the Japanese POWs. And one of these structures here, like this one here, which is actually a memorial to a person named Futabate Shime, who was a writer and who is thought to be the first to have brought realism to Japanese literature. And he done that by translating a lot of Russian realist books. So he was traveling around on his way back to Japan. Unfortunately, he fell ill on board the boat and died en route. And so this structure here is not a tomb but a memorial to him. Next door is another large and unique lantern-like umbrella tomb. This one is for an individual named Kantaro Ueyama, which is also another memorial. Kantaro Ueyama perished in a plane crash at Sembawang in 1942. He was the first son of the inventor of the mosquito coil. So they actually built this memorial in his name. It is believed that the first Japanese prostitutes arrived in Singapore around the 1870s, but the term Karayuki-san was not found in the pre-war consular reports or other documents. It was only after the war, especially since the 1970s, that they became gradually known as Karayuki-san. However, in Shimabara, Amakusa, and Nagasaki, women who went to China or Southeast Asia to work as prostitutes has been called Karayuki-san, which means those going to China or overseas. Many Karayuki-san died of illness in poverty. Most of their tombs were built with only wood markers, which had decayed over time. The Mutual Self-Help Society built an unnamed small stone grave inscribed with only Serai Bodai, which means spiritual enlightenment, to pray for the souls of the dead. The Mutual Self-Help Society, which was established in 1888 by Tagajiro Futaki, was the predecessor of the Japanese Association. And on this side of the cemetery, you will notice there are more of these smaller tombstones, which are the tombstones for the Karayuki-san. And that means that on this side here is probably the older portion of the cemetery. So during the Meiji era, many Japanese girls from poor households were taken to East Asia and Southeast Asia in the second half of the 19th century to work as prostitutes. And many of them originated from the Amakusa Islands, which had a large and long stigmatized Japanese Christian community. But after World War I, because of the industrialization of Japan that advanced at a great pace, investment in Singapore and Malaya increased, leading to a creation of a more affluent and middle-class Japanese population in Singapore. Consequently, the presence of the Karayuki-sans became a growing source of discomfort, and the Japanese government repatriated large numbers of them from the 1920s. So the changes of the composition of the Japanese population were reflected in the evolution of the cemetery, which grew to include the tombs of those who were involved in agriculture, retail, mining, publishing, fishing, and other trades. So as the community became wealthier, the Japanese community, the architecture of the tombs took on more ornate, elaborate styles. Design features included stone sculptures of Jizo, which are Japanese deities, Corinthian-style columns, or you even have plots where they have demarcated with fence and gates. And not only that, they started to have memorials, memorial tombs, memorial stones to famous people, or people who died here but whose body doesn't remain in Singapore. So this is the Japanese Cemetery Park. It's still continued to be maintained by the Japanese Association of Singapore, and it has now become a memorial park since 1987. So come here if you have an appreciation of history, a bit of natural flora and fauna, but this is definitely a legacy of the history of Japan and Singapore. And this place is often visited by Japanese students, veterans, residents, and tourists. The environment here is very calm and peaceful. I guess that's because a lot of people are resting around here. Serene, calm, and peaceful. Also the weather too. Okay, did a nice short little walk around here after the rain ended. Saw a few things, interesting things I guess. So, as per usual, you know what you should do. Like, share and subscribe. Support me on Patreon and also PayPal. Or just watch some of my old videos. Support my channel. And lastly, but the most important thing, don't forget to join me for my next adventure. I will see you guys around. Bye bye.